a little longer, but whenever you're ready, you can
Let
begin.
me wait a minute or two and see if we get Victor on. 'cause
Sure.
he's the only other person we need to have. Maybe I'll just call Victor. You should have gotten an email today, did you? Yes. You would have got it from Lisa. Lisa Hilton, Hylton. And 10 o'clock, 10:30, something like that.
Zell, if you would like to give him the meeting ID, you can. And the password right over.
Okay.
If
Go ahead.
if you hold on.
Victor, are you still there? I gotta get a pencil.
Zell, in the top left-hand corner, do you have a little eye icon?
Yeah.
If you click on that, do you see that?
I-
Maybe you, I'm not sure if you see it, but I can read you the numbers.
I don't have it on my screen.
Okay, I can give you the numbers.
Well, let's see if Victor gets in, because you
Okay.
did send it to Victor, right?
Yep.
Well, then I'm sure he'll find it.
Yeah, I sent the Zoom generated invitation, which I'm not sure everybody always receives, but I did a separate one as well.
Right.
Right.
I appreciate that. That was
Yeah.
nice. Thank you.
We did get through.
I love it when the internet says your internet is unstable. That's just what I need to hear.
Well, it's better than you being unstable.
Hello? Hi, Victor. Any luck? Victor?
Oh, hold on, I see somebody in attendees. Oh, that's Rick.
Victor? Yeah, I could just about run across the street and go get him, but it's.
Yeah, he wanted to say, set up a smoke signal.
Good evening, folks.
Oh, hi, Rick.
How are you all?
Hey, Rick, how are you?
Good, thanks. Hey, Mickey, long time no see there.
Yeah, good to
Yes,
see you,
Yeah.
Rick. How are you doing?
Good.
So I just sent a jib jab birthday card to my brother, and it was quite clever. It was a Zoom birthday card, and it made fun of all the things that happen on a Zoom gathering, including the character keeps going, unmute, unmute, unmute. The jib jab, I don't know if you ever used it. It
Oh, yeah,
pastes
it's pretty funny.
your face into these characters that are dancing around on the screen. So it shows me going unmute.
Well, why don't we go ahead and start? And hopefully Victor will.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna step away for a minute. I just got out of another meeting, so I'll be back
That's
shortly.
fine.
I mean, you got
Okay, so we've got everybody here except Victor at this point. And the other person who is Mickey's with us, but Victor's just calling me. Hold on a second. Victor.
Mickey, this is
Hello.
like a skit out of Saturday Night Live.
You can't make this up.
I'm just gonna email him the information again.
Okay, that would be
So
great.
just give me a few minutes.
Okay. Well, okay, so the first item of business is roll call. We've done that. We're waiting to hear from Victor. So I think Jesse sent you all a copy of the draft minutes. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look those over. And do I hear a motion?
Move to approve the draft minutes sent by Jesse for our April meeting.
Do I hear a second?
A second.
Second, Sarah? Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye? Put your hand up and I can see. Okay, that's good. Let me get this on so I can see everybody. Okay. Do we have anybody from the general public? Here we go, Victor again. Hello, Victor. Great communication across knowing, but anyhow. So I don't think we have anybody on from the public, so no public comments. Any announcements that are general and wide? Okay, let's move on to our first topic on the new business, and that is we've asked Mary Gardner, who is our Groton Town Assessor, to come talk to us about what happens to assessments and values of property during. Hey, Victor, congratulations! Glad to have you here. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
I asked Mary to come talk to the group, partly because we've spent some time talking about sea level rise, major storms, and what that might do to properties. And it came up certainly in the conversation about a bridge to Groton Long Point, about what happens to property values going forward. So Mary, with that general sort of a introduction, I also say Mary's been with the town that I know of at least 15 years. Is that long? Or
A little bit longer.
A little bit longer. Okay. But go ahead, Mary. Why don't you take it away and tell us what you know about this whole business?
Sure, sure. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see who everybody is here. So yeah, I've been the assessor for a while. I've been in the office since about 1986 and worked my way up to this seat. And fortunately, we've not really ever had to go through any kind of major disaster or assessment recovery. But really, first and foremost, the statutes dictate the way that we would handle changing assessments, and the existing statutes don't address any kind of major natural disaster or something that would occur in mass. The only thing the statutes really do say is that if we're going to make any kind of an adjustment to an assessment based on a fire or an act of God, the only way we could adjust an assessment is if that, say, a structure was totally damaged. If the property owner took out a demolition permit and within 120 days of the occurrence, the structure was completely demolished and the building inspector signed off on the demolition permit as the site being graded, then we could make an adjustment to the assessment. So that, you know, if you're talking about something like Hurricane Maria or Ivan, that would probably be a pretty unlikely event that every property that was so damaged would be completely razed and the lot set back to a vacant lot within 120 days of the occurrence. So The only other town that I'm aware of in the last, decade or so that sort of went through this was Milford with Superstorm Sandy. They had a fair amount of damage, and basically the assessor brought in volunteer other assessors to help get an idea of what the damage was. And at any point, if anybody has any questions, feel free to just interrupt and ask a question. But the one thing I think we can do under the statutes are we can make adjustments to the building condition as of the assessment date. And just to back up a little bit, the way our data is structured here is every 5 years, we're required by law to conduct a mass reappraisal. So we appraise all the real estate once every 5 years. We adjust our data tables, our cost tables. Those costs live for the next 5 years until the next revaluation. And we appraise all the commercial, industrial, residential, vacant lots the same way. The values are set once every 5 years. So I think what Milford did was for Superstorm Sandy, they brought in some other assessors and they went through the neighborhoods and they determined as best as they could in groupings which properties sustained what kind of damage. And I think the assessor made the adjustment to say a building, if your house is intact, we say it's at 100% condition. Say it's weather tight, we might say the roof is on, the windows are in place, but there's no trades on the inside, there's no plumbing, there's no electricity, we would say that's 50% complete. I think what the assessor did in Milford was to make adjustments, say by streets or by bands of streets, and basically just take down the percent complete for the structures. The data that we have in our system, we have a whole appraisal system. We have a record for every piece of real estate in town, and the record is broken out by the land characteristics. And land characteristics would be, is it waterfront? Is it water view? What is the acreage? What is the topography like? Is there wetlands? Are there ponds? We try to gather that information and factor all those characteristics into the value of the land. We also have characteristics and data for the structures. Is it a residential use, a commercial use, square footage, age? We do actually have a reconstruction cost new, and then we do apply depreciation to that to get to the reconstruction cost new less depreciation, and those are typically the values that you see on the tax roll. So
Mary,
Yes.
can I ask a question?
Yep.
Okay, supposing you have a place like Jupiter Point or Groton Long Point where, let's say, we get a 1938 storm and the building gets, several buildings in a row get blown off. And then you go to look at what the value of the property is. The fact that you have for land a new factor that was not originally used, for example, flooding. How would that be? How would you look at that?
So if we'd look at the physical condition of the land. If the lot looked the same after the hurricane, there'd be no change made. If the lot had lost some kind of acreage, we'd have to probably make some kind of an adjustment, apply a factor, because their deed probably will still list the lot as 80 by 100, but maybe they lost 20 feet because, you know, the erosion was so great. So
Okay.
we would probably have to make some kind of adjustment to, we couldn't adjust the acreage. The only thing we could do is adjust the contributory value of the land against the overall acreage. So for the structure, if the house was taken right off the foundation and gone, I think we could address that. If the structure was damaged, I think we could address that. So our assessment date is October 1st. And what we do every year is we canvass the town based on the building permits that we get. And we change our data according to the building permit. So if someone's taking out a demo permit, or they're adding an addition, or they're building a house, whatever state the physical structure is in October 1st of every year, that's the grand list that we sign. That's the tax bills that go out in July. If a hurricane, say, happened in April and nothing
not.
was done, I'm sorry?
That's
We
like-
hope not.
Okay, let's say a hurricane happened during the hurricane season, which is September to November. If it happened after October 1st, which is our assessment date, the grand list is done. I can't go back and backdate the assessments. And unless the house is raised within 120 days within the hurricane, from the hurricane event, I can't touch the assessments according to statute. So the only thing I can do is make a change for the following October 1st to reflect whatever the status of the structure is.
Okay.
So
I guess one of the things I would ask is, to what extent is risk figured into that? In that, yeah, perhaps that property wasn't damaged, but it's clear that this particular area is at risk for flooding, or to what extent is a property's assessment based on neighboring conditions, so that if you know, well, I mean, one example that's close to my home is the question of, if someone builds builds something in a neighboring property, does that affect? Certainly affects the value of the property, but does it affect the assessment of the property? So
the value and the assessment are the same.
Right.
Technically, that's the same thing.
doesn't really,
No.
the resale value though is clearly changed whether the assessment changes or not, you know. And so I would think that would be the true also for someone come in and look at a piece of property and say, well, what is the risk of this being flooded? And you say, seems like it might be fairly high, and getting higher because of, let's say, climate change. And so that would certainly affect the resale value. It seems like it probably ought to also affect somehow the assessment.
Because we reset the values every 5 years, and if you're talking residential property, what is the benchmark of value for residential property? It's properties that sell in the area. So we and the revaluation company study the sales leading up to the assessment date, usually 2 years worth of sales. And that set, we may have 30 sales in a neighborhood, and those 30 sales set the value for all 800 parcels in that neighborhood. That's mass appraisal. And if something happens that resets what the thought is of a neighborhood's value, we don't address it until the next revaluation. So those values always stay for 5 years. And market sales,
Victor?
Just following up on that point, what is the weight of this mass appraisal compared to the more granular elements of the appraisal, such as square footage and all the rest of the? of just the property as opposed to the wider value as assessed by sales. How much does it weigh?
When we have, say, Noank Village, which is its own neighborhood, say they have 10 sales, what we consider to be arm's length sales in the revaluation. We stratify those 10 sales. First of all, we verify the data for all 10 properties to make sure our data is good, because if it's not, when we run the ratio between the sales price to our appraisal, we don't want any outliers. Then we stratify by age of the structure, quality of construction, location, size. We look at depreciation. Once we're comfortable that we've modified our sales set so that our appraisals are reflective of what the property sold for, we're going to apply that mass appraisal to the other properties in that neighborhood. And then once we do that, we have to be within a very tight range overall for the entire neighborhood. We have to pass state benchmarks and requirements that this mass appraisal has worked. So that, I don't think we want to have that discussion today, because that would take a while. But we do that stratification.
I think that sooner or later that is a factor because of the different value of properties in different parts of not just Groton Long Point, but the town of Groton in general. And
we do address that. We have 14 residential neighborhoods in Groton, and the whole purpose of the neighborhood as it's defined is to define the land value, because it's location, location, location that matters. And so breaking down the neighborhoods into what they are is really setting the land tables, and then we use the structure values from there.
Yeah, I guess, let me, here's what I think may be a problem. When we were asked to look at how high the bridge should be to Groton Long Point, as an example, and we know with some certainty that we're likely to have 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050. That begins to put a whole slew of houses in that whole neighborhood in some level of risk that's higher than it is today. And if you had a 38 hurricane in let's say 2045, and in fact it ends up being even stronger than the 38. And I think, as I recall, when we talked, Groton Long Point represents about, and Mumford Grove represents about 11% of our tax base. This is likely to get a lot of people excited. The property owners, because they're still on the hook for the value of the house before it got damaged. And the rest of the public, the other rest of the public has to pay taxes, and presumably the town budget would drop by 11% or 10%. And so when you get those kinds of situations, are we just playing on uncharted waters?
I think you are. And the properties are going to sell and continue to sell and transfer between parties right up until the date of a hurricane or any kind of event. And it's, your values are, until that event, your values are based on what the properties are selling for.
Okay. So
And-
what happens
and-
after?
No, go ahead.
What happens after? I think I understand that your point there, but then what my question is, so how would the town, from a policy point of view, go forward after the event?
The town would have to take an inventory of what exactly happened.
Right.
And the from an assessment standpoint, from October to October, or anything that happened in between that would be allowed by statute, we would have to make adjustments.
Mhm.
So it sounds like what's likely to happen in the case of a neighborhood like Groton Long Point that will be impacted by sea level rise is as people start to understand that, and you're putting up houses for sale and properties coming up, you'd expect that to translate to a decreased price or a decreased, offering on the real estate, and that there'll be a downward slope for the town of Groton. I don't know what the shape of it is. I don't know how steep it is. I don't know if we have any benchmark of some other area that went through a change and eventually closed to look at it with. But, if you're talking about something that happens over a 30-year period, I would guess at some point at the 15-year mark, at the 12-year mark, people are going to figure out that in my lifetime, this is going to happen. I'm only going to own this house for 10 years. Its price is going to go down significantly.
That's true. And that is captured during the revaluation.
Right.
So when prices change in between revaluations, we're barred by statute on changing value because
Yeah.
it's just the way the structure is worked. Connecticut is a 5-year reval state. And
Groton will have, probably 2 more valuations, or so. And then, you'd think you'd start really seeing this if you haven't already. I mean, the state of California is seeing and reporting 15% reductions in real estate value.
Mhm.
so I just read an article on Ivan and in Florida, Santa Rosa County in Florida. They were the appraisers, and it's county government, so it's 100,000 parcels at a time. But they were very surprised after Hurricane Ivan that the value of real estate increased because people were tearing down their homes and selling out, and people who wanted to own waterfront real estate were coming in and buying it inexpensively and building new homes. So you could be surprised. It's just absolutely no way to predict. I have a crystal ball. I can get it for you, but just no
Well,
way.
you're the lady that has the crystal ball.
I do. The only thing we can do in this office is to play catch up. That's unfortunate. But the good news is if and when you want to run your models and you want to try to get an idea of what the existing values are and start to look at the different flood zones, the ZE, the AE, or the VE and AE, we through the GIS system, because Groton is very fortunate to have a homegrown geographic information system, we can run any models you want. We can pick any flood zone and say, what is the value of the structures within that flood zone? We can do all kinds of modeling for you.
Great.
Okay. Frank,
What's that, Zell?
I think Frank.
Yeah, no, Mary, you did a good job. One of the questions I had, of course, was where the market comes in, and there you made that very clear. If that model 38 hurricane that was being described occurred, it would only affect the tax rolls immediately if the structures were raised within 120 days, right?
Correct. What that statute says is that we cannot change an assessment mid-year unless the house's structure is demolished within 120 days and signed off, not just demolished, but physically signed off by the building inspector.
Right. I'm wondering and Jesse might be better able to comment on this. I believe that I have heard that at least in Fairfield County, and it may be in Connecticut and coastal areas in general, and I wonder if Groton falls into that, we've been seeing anything like a decrease in property valuation. because of concerns about risk. Are there any data to be able to check that out?
Frank,
We-
I think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Frank, I think that is some of the work that Jim has been working on, isn't it?
I think so.
I don't have an update on it, but I know that was something that interested him enormously, and he was trying to track that. And Joe McDougall down in Fairfield was also doing that from the law school's perspective as they were dealing with the legal implications of such things. But I'd have to touch base with him again, or you could, Frank.
I will. Thanks.
Mary, just so you know, Jim is Jim O'Donnell, who's the head of the CERCA program over at Avery Point, and does the climate change stuff for the state.
Okay. So we, as a matter of routine, constantly review sales against our appraisals because we're trying to have a sense of where our numbers are in the market compared, where our numbers are as compared to the market.
Sure.
I have looked at a couple of the neighborhoods and, you know, we use the median ratio because we take out the outliers on the high and the low end, but we're not seeing too much in difference in value. It's only like a couple of percentage drops between now and the 2016 revaluation numbers.
Right.
And you'll find properties that have sold for a whole lot less and a whole lot more. But when we stratify the ratios and look at them as a whole, which is what we do during revaluations, we're not far off right now.
Right.
So that tells us the market has not changed all that much.
Yeah. I think you saw something after 2008. There was a dip after 2008 and things have come back from there.
What was our reval was 2011, and
Right.
every Southeastern Connecticut is a funny place because we take a long time to catch up to the world, and every neighborhood but one in 2011 had a drop in value. One neighborhood actually had an increase in value,
Right.
and it leveled out with the 2016 reval. Pretty much everybody dropped in 2016.
Can I ask, was that an area that was high or low as relates to flooding?
Its ability to flood is very high.
Okay,
It was Groton Long Point.
right, it went way up.
It went up.
These fluctuations that you just described, were they pretty much tracking the economy? So that generally speaking, as either the overall economy of the country got better or worse, property values went up or down, or economy in Southeastern Connecticut. So if, you know, Pfizer's laying off a slug of people, property values are going down, you know, that sort of thing.
It strictly follows property sales, and property sales are a result of the economy.
Okay,
Some local and some national.
So it's unlikely.
Absolutely.
To what extent is it driven by local events? I mean, for example, you know, a landfill, you know, when the Groton landfill kind of became not a landfill anymore, did that cause property values on Flanders Road to go up, or do people just kind of forget the thing is there after a generation or so, and yeah, okay, so I have a landfill in my backyard, but I don't care, or haven't, you know, it's always been there, it doesn't bother me. So to what extent can local development impact these property values that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the benchmark are the actual physical sales of property. So in order to measure anything, you have to have sales in that area. you can make adjustments. If you have someone that has high traffic, we can adjust the land because we know maybe the property hasn't sold in 20 years, but we know they have high traffic. And so we assume it would sell for maybe 10% less than someone that didn't have the traffic. But the benchmark are the physical sales. And the sales will tell us the story. We can't think in terms of the global economy. We can understand it, and we can understand if a major employer is downsizing, but the sales will tell us that.
Well, I wasn't actually so much asking about the assessments, because I understand that your assessments are being driven by sales history. So I was actually just interested in what's happening to the sales history from your experience. How is that impacted by, things like that are environmental things? Okay, so a piece of land gets bought by Gosha, is now a nice park. Do we see property values going up because of that? That sort of thing.
No, not really.
Well, I think it's too fine. Mick, I'll bet it does. But you heard earlier.
It could, but you have to identify it. You have to have paired sales to say, this house is next to a park and it sold for 5% more than this house, and the house is exactly the same. The land is exactly the same, and the only difference is location. So your mass appraisal, you'd be surprised at the level of detail that we get to, and sometimes it's poo-pooed, but it shouldn't be, because it's a good year-long project and a lot of detail is paid attention to. But this is not fee appraisal. This is mass appraisal, and they are different. Right. But it ultimately.
Mary, I want to know, sort of changing the subject slightly, do you have any advice for us trying to deal with the whole notion of resiliency and sustainability as it relates to
Yeah, I would suggest maybe not getting too much in the weeds, but trying to have a sense of, and I think you guys do have the sense, and Sarah and Jesse, Maggie as well, of the really vulnerable property bands. Where are they? Which flood zone? I think FEMA's already helped to identify that. What is the value of the properties in those zones? What is the value of those structures? And you can get that from GIS, and you can run some models to say this is the vulnerable. I talking to Jenna, it sounds like either the state or the feds have some modeling that's out there for surge, storm surge. It's going to be reactionary. I don't really know what you're going to do to be proactive, other than what Rick is going to talk about next, which is how do you prepare to handle a disaster like that? And how do you do it so swiftly and efficiently to capture the data you need to capture to get your FEMA funding, on time to be able to rebuild all your infrastructure. So
if you want to, that's the other end. If you want to, that's the other end of it. Is you say, sure. One of the options is retreat. And you say, well, how does ever that fit factored in here? Groton Long Point gets hammered and we turn it into a park and move everybody north of 184. Easier said than done.
Well, and property rights are important.
All right.
And, they're personal.
Yep. Yep. Victor, you have a question?
Yeah. I want to rephrase your question a little bit. But Mary, the only way of appraising the impact of risk on property value that I can think of right now is to model the changes in property value as consumers who buy homes and regardless of risk, buy a property that's been raised by a previous hurricane, as in Florida, and then they pay and they build multi-million-dollar houses in the same place. So you're stuck with the value of the property. But insurance companies think differently. Insurance company rates homeowners insurance, incorporates some risks into the fees that we pay, anybody pays, based on factors. I don't know if they, how they include, they probably don't include flood because that's covered by the government to some extent, but other risks. And so the first question is, and this is forgetting the rules for a minute, just your opinion. Okay, and so this is you're thinking outside of the rules,
Outside of my assessor head. Okay,
outside of your assessor rate.
okay.
When we have to consider recommendations for the town that must take into consideration the risks that the group is talking about, floods, extreme situations. How can the town best protect its tax base? And this may require, a lot of espressos or glasses of wine thinking about this, because at one point you have to decide retreat, like Frank is mentioning. It would just happen again, and there will be recurrent losses. Versus the benefit of rebuilding, with insurance money, FEMA, private insurance, that temporarily boosts your tax base. So putting on your strategic thinking cap, where do we draw the line? How do we think? What would you advise us to repeat what Zell was asking?
That's municipalities are not your average animal. All the funding here is taxpayer dollars. So
Right.
I don't know how you convince a town to subsidize areas that are vulnerable to flooding. The
Well,
federal government is trying.
I did not imply that, by the way.
No, I know, but the federal government is trying to do that, with grant money to help people raise their houses and I don't know if that program is still open, but I remember it was open once upon a time, and
Right.
quite a few houses that we saw were raised. But how do you, to protect a town and protect its tax base would just be public policy, but what is that public policy going to be?
So let me ask you about that in particular. Are you, I think to have read somewhere that there are some parts of the country, or I don't know if it's states, where the government may purchase the price of a property, but over time, the value of that property decreases proportional to the perceived risk of loss, floods or other, especially flood, sea level rise, and so forth. So if I'm the government, I pay you $200,000 for your property today, and but 5 years or 10 years from now, I will pay you half as much or a percent less, which incorporates what Mickey has been asking, I think, how does risk factor into the assessment of the value of a property, or how could it, if the rules could change? Obviously not in Groton, it would have to be maybe at the state level or beyond that.
So you're saying that there are jurisdictions where the government, the local government or the state buys the development rights to a property?
Well, no. Well, I think what Victor's talking about is what happened after Sandy in New York State. The governor decided that FEMA money should be spent or could be spent so that the state of New York would offer would offer to properties that had been substantially destroyed, would
Mhm.
offer the landowner 110% of the value of their property before it was destroyed or
Okay.
modified. But it had an interesting caveat. They could do it provided that the person who accepted that would not move outside the county. I mean, it was an interesting sort of way of doing it. I guess some people did take that on.
And so the houses were vacated and they were torn down and,
Yep.
and so then the county or the state was able to come through and do some kind of remediation to the property, or
No, as I
they just
understand
left
it,
it?
they just left it.
But
It was
No, but the assumption there is that the property owner agrees to stay in the county.
Got
So
it.
right now they have 110% of the value of their property, and presumably they would build or do something, but that money sort of stays as part of the tax base for the county.
got it. And that was FEMA funding that paid the
I
110%?
well, that's how I didn't look into it in real detail. I saw this in a couple of articles in the New York Times right after Sandy.
Hmm.
It seemed like a very interesting sort of approach.
Yeah, so, municipalities would have to have some kind of public policy in place, which would go through the process of, the public weighing in and accepting or not accepting that policy.
Right.
It's a hard one, truly. I don't have any good way to say how anybody's going to handle this, because it does really seem like most of the time it's just a reaction to an event.
Right.
And I know you're all trying to figure out the best course of action based on events that have already happened.
It seems to me that there are examples of how local government does manipulate, make decisions that manipulates property values. For example, sewering an area or not sewering an area. So you go in and you sewer an area, and it helps, of course, the existing landowners not have problems with septic tanks, et cetera. It also opens up often opens up new places that are undeveloped, and now those become more valuable. Another example, I think, in terms of the flooding example, is that a town or the feds or the Corps of Engineers builds a seawall or builds so I think there are examples of how local decision making is often done to help or not help the value of the property owners that are
Yeah. What's interesting about Groton is Groton doesn't own a lot of the shoreline.
Right. Very
The
little.
municipality owns very little of it. It's all privately owned. And,
Stayed in private, yeah.
Well, listen, Mary, I'd like to thank you very much for spending this time with us and getting us a sort of a little a primer on what the realities are. And I think they're pretty stark and pretty interesting.
Seems like returning to the issue of the ability to model might be of interest to this.
Yeah.
I think that might
think
be
so.
that might
I
be a
think
They're really good. I mean, you guys sound like you're very well equipped to do that. So
We are, and we were one of the first towns to do an in-house GIS, and we've been at it for a really, really long time. And we have a lot of data that we pull together. We use it all the time in the revaluations.
what does
So
GIS stand for, Mary?
it stands for Geographic Information System.
Oh, what I would think it would be. Okay, all right.
And if I may, we did get some of that information from the University of Connecticut, Avery Point, with O'Donnell and that group fed a lot into our GIS system through the hazard maps and, if you will, and that sort of information 10, 12 years ago or so.
Right.
Something for the group to really think about.
Well, any final comments from anybody in the task force or anything you'd like to tell us, Mary?
Very well done.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Thank you.
Um,
We're
yeah.
here to help any way we can. We actually kind of like this type of challenge, right, Zell?
Well, Mary and I have actually worked on a couple of things
Yeah,
I mean, I was interested in some issues
Yeah.
in Noank about lot size and house size. And it was really kind of remarkable what Mary and her team was able to help us with. And it made a huge difference in understanding what the history had been in the community. And that then led to basically a changing of the rules so that future development would look more like what the history had set forth. And so it was a terrific
exercise.
exercise, which I really thought was, I mean, it sort of overwhelmed people a little bit. They're like, what did you do? But it was really terrific. So,
Yeah, we like that stuff.
okay,
We
good.
still call
Well,
it Zell stuff, by the way. Still on the,
yeah, you I have a couple little accounts in the town. There's
yeah,
Zell's stuff at
Yes.
the assessor's office, and there's Zell's stuff in the GIS office. It's a little embarrassing from time to time, but that's all right.
it's okay. We like it.
Well, thank you.
You're
Thank-
welcome. I'm just gonna hang in here and listen to Rick too.
Sure.
That's okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
Rick,
yeah.
you're on. You've been at this
A while, Zell, and
longer than anybody else has been here. So
Yep.
why don't you sort of give us a little bit of history, and we may not get through everything, and so we may want to have you come back if that would be acceptable.
yeah, no, that's fine. And to follow up, I really wasn't going to talk about what Mary talked about, but communities have been working like Groton, Long Point, other areas that they actually have to meet FEMA guidelines, and zoning has changed. So now they elevate the building. There's some freeboard, which in addition to what the surge may be. So buildings like mine, which are maybe 1 or 2 feet above the flood level, if you look to the buildings next door to me, they're another 8, 10, 12 feet in the air. So consequently, this helps Mary because the value of the buildings go up, but it does change the shape of the community. So some things are trying to be handled through zoning. The retreat that you talked about, Frank, is certainly out there. And I guess FEMA was getting tired of paying for rebuilding certain communities on the Outer Banks or what have you. Stratford has an example of an island just off of, I think it's South Beach, that there was a little bridge, there was cottages out there. They had a storm, it knocked down everything. They didn't let them rebuild. So there are examples of those sorts of things throughout the country and state. So it's pretty interesting, but that's really not why I came today. So that's okay.
And we do have an example in Groton, and that is the whole barrier beach out there in front of
Right.
The park, where that had been before 38
Right.
covered with houses, and that's no longer
Mhm.
covered with houses. It's simply
Right.
a barrier beach now.
Right. And what the ICLEI study is, Zell, that we did a long time ago, which is really the first foray of Groton into the sustainability stuff. We worked with ICLEI, Long Island Sound. They got a grant. They came to us and talked about it. They wanted to use Groton as a representative community on sea level rise information. Did a study. They did some economic modeling, for example, which was tremendous in the Mystic area. What happens? There's numerous solutions like you talked about, Frank. You either retreat, you do flood proofing, you do raising of the buildings, so whatever people look at as a solution is a combination and not any one thing. A lot of people we looked at a seawall, for example, at the railroad bridge down in Mystic River. If we put a wall or a dam there that you could open for allow boat traffic, we would flood Stonington. So, there are some unintended consequences about all these things that people look at doing it, and it's not an easy problem. So I'll leave that portion of the sustainability, which I'm really interested in and haven't had much involvement in recently, but certainly would like to get back into it. I appreciate you asking me to come speak with you tonight. I've been kind of waiting for the opportunity, and I appreciate Zell, you know, offering it to me to come talk to you about what we've been doing over the years. We have early on, we had looked at trying to get some additional resources into the sustainability area. At one point, the council authorized a couple of positions to move when I moved from planning as a sustainability manager back over to public works. We were supposed to have a grant writer and a part-time financial person, neither of which transpired. So we were still short of resources, and being the builder, I guess, for the town, they found plenty of other things for me to do after streetscapes and the first school projects and those. But in the interim, we were able to do things like LED lights, which we got a zero interest loan through Eversource for 4 years, which we're paying off now. So not only will we be saving $100,000 next year, we'll be saving on 60% of the energy costs. So things like that are tremendous. And as you probably all well know, it sometimes takes money to save money. And in the long run, it ends up better for the community, less cost, but there is some cost up front, which I'll talk about ways to potentially avoid some of that in the future. But over the years, I've done numerous studies here. I've looked at natural gas. For example, we were able to talk to the Eversource to get gas up to the top of the hill. If we had been able to connect the public works complex at the time, and it was maybe 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer ago, if we had connected all the buildings at that time, it would have been $300 and some odd thousand savings for our heating costs here. The time wasn't right. People didn't want to move forward on that because the low hanging fruit, which is lighting and stuff, had been basically looked at. All the other costs now are machinery costs, so they get done on a replacement basis. We did, as one project, we're able to get the high school connected. The high school, when we built it, had a dual fuel capability with the boilers. And we have some ice tanks that we are able to freeze ice at night when the electrical rate is supposedly cheaper, and be able to use that for cooling in the daytime. But they converted to gas. It cost them about $50,000. They saved that $50,000 in the first year. So it was a 1 year return on investment on that. Over here, we've converted the Public Works garage. It had an old steam heating system that's been converted to hot water. There's been new boilers in place there, and it's been converted to gas. It's almost a year now, so I should be able to get some figures on what the actual savings in heating costs are there, in addition to, you know, things burning clear and helping the greenhouse gas issues. So we have, and I have done numerous other studies on electrical, other things that could be done, but it always seemed, and Zell can tell you this, we always seem to be butting our heads up against political will to do some of these things. I mean, it's always slash the budget. Don't look at what the long-term savings may be to the community. Instead, it's a short-term kind of, they want an immediate results, which always doesn't happen. And the LED lights is a perfect example. So now we'll save X amount of dollars through the future. We have looked at solar panels in various places. We've been through 2 potential developments of the landfill. Neither one of them worked out because the state hasn't been very supportive in their virtual net metering program. It always seems that there's never enough money in that program to help fund all the projects that are there. We are now working with the Green Bank because not only did we, the builders of the schools, but also the Permanent School Building Committee were, of course, interested in alternate energy sources there. We have been working with the Green Bank on solar panels on both the elementary school that's going to replace Cutler.
Can
Yes.
I ask you a quick question? Rick, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
I'm interested in your perspective on Connecticut's position on solar power versus contrast that with Massachusetts, which has really aggressively gone forward.
Oh, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we're a member of what they call NEMSA, the New England Municipal Sustainability Network. So I come back from those meetings, and it's basically sustainability managers, directors, public works directors from communities. We're the only one in Connecticut that participates. So we're kind of the lone wolf. There's many from Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, there's a couple. But yeah, they are very aggressive in other places. In Rhode Island, for example, they were knocking each other down to put up solar panels. And
Why
Rhode
is
Island was
that?
using it as a,
But Connecticut has lagged. Why
yeah.
is
Why is that? Because things like virtual net metering, for example, we have the landfill. There's no anything behind the meter, if you will, to power from the landfill. So that electricity has to be dumped onto the grid. And for us to use it someplace else, we have to go through what they call this virtual net metering process, which hasn't been expanded to meet the community's desires to do those sorts of things. That's been a significant problem. There has been some community shared solar projects that are out there. We tried, one of the developers looked at that. That didn't work out ultimately because again, it was like a semi-grant kind of program thing. There's just not the, I guess the width of the programs here to support the desires of the people that want to do the things. Yeah, Frank?
Rick, two questions. The mass metering business, I think we heard a little bit about it from Eversource when they were in with us. What drives that? Is it Eversource that gives me the meter and then gives you the data?
As far as, I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Well, you said there's a problem with going to solar.
It's a program called virtual net metering.
Right,
So
what's all that about?
So you could view it like a swimming pool. You create water, you throw it in a swimming pool right over at the landfill, and you can take it out at other places in town, like public buildings or schools or whatever.
Right.
But it's a program, and the value of the program is very limited. So before you can even get a project together, unless you're several years ahead and can get on the list, it's typically filled up before you have an opportunity to get there.
Right. It's part of what we were talking about.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I was going to say it's part of what we were talking about when we were talking about the feasibility of trying to do a microgrid at the top of the hill.
Yep, that's right.
And so last year, legislation was raised. Well, and actually the cap on virtual net metering was raised. And then the legislature sort of adjourned without adjourning. And there is an effort underway now, and I think probably with much less opposition than in the past, just because of current circumstances. And so that is a possibility. And what it would mean is if we had, if there was a solar panel on the landfill, the value of that could be credited against the usage on up to 4 other municipal buildings.
Right. So I'm glad to hear that that's increasing, but again, for this year, it was filled again, but we do have some interest in that.
Right.
So that's a state of Connecticut legislature issue of the limit they've put on this virtual net metering notion that I'm generating over here to go into the grid. And so obviously in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they have taken a different approach.
Yeah,
they have a cap on it. They have a cap. But the other thing that both of those states have done is provide far more lucrative support to the programs in general.
Well, and in fact, with the LED lights, so the state was paying for some of the communities to put LED lights in their communities. I mean, we got some rebates from Eversource on that, but really no support from the state to do that. So it's kind of interesting the way different states handle these different issues.
Right. One other question.
Yes.
What is Green Bank?
The Green Bank used to be called Cephia. It's a quasi-financial agency or quasi-state agency that was formed under state statute to assist in providing loans and financing for various projects. What they just came up with recently, probably 3 or 4 months ago, because we were looking at solar panels that just happened to cross my desk at the appropriate time, was on a municipal assistance program, whereby we work with them. We have signed a letter of intent for them for the middle school and the new elementary school. And they will go out to a ZREC auction. They will do all the technical work for us. They will go out and find a partner to finance and end up owning the panels, operating the panels, maintaining the panels. And in this case, the town won't be on buildings that the town typically uses, but that the Board of Ed uses and pays the utilities for. So the Board of Ed would then sign a power purchase agreement with them, which would stabilize their electrical rate for 20 years, which is the initial length of the program. So they came up with, like I said, with this initial program for us, and it was very timely because there was significant interest in providing some panels. Now, they've also come up with some kind of unique ways to do that, which people may have seen pictures across the country where they have like carports or canopies, if you will, on some parking lot stuff. So, for example, we could probably provide, instead of 15 or 20% of the power for the elementary school, for example, maybe we could get as high as 30 or 40% of the power generated by solar panels for those schools. That figure is not firm yet. We're still in design and looking at what the costs are, but there would be 8 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour savings because we don't pay distribution on that energy that's developed and provided through the solar panels. So, and this group, CSW, who is the technical arm of what used to be Cephia and now is the Green Bank, is interested outside of the MAP program, again, for the landfill. So we'll be talking with them to see and what they have in mind for the landfill, because our initial studies over the last 2 times showed we could put as much as 5 megawatts up there. Should be significant amount for our municipal buildings, if we could get into the virtual net metering program. So, or community shared, which is a little bit different. So we've been working on those. Jesse mentioned the microgrid thing. We had brought up the issue of fuel cells, microgrids. We looked at those several times. We thought maybe we could put something in where the high school is, and the high school and the middle school could share it. Not much support for that. So it's kind of
From who?
by the town.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Wait,
So
when you say the town,
well, basically through the department. It may have got some discussion at the town manager's level, but never really went forward there. And we've got a new town manager. We've got a new director of public works who's much more amenable to some of these sustainability issues. So we haven't had an opportunity to work on a lot of these things through him yet. But we have, we have got support for the solar panel project, for the designs with very little and actually pretty good support, I would say, on those things.
Is the timeline for the return on investment?
I'm sorry?
Is the issue the timeline for return on investment?
The issue sometimes is the political will. Right now, we don't have a strategic plan, right? We don't have a climate action plan. I was going to propose to you folks, and some of you may be aware of what they call the Global Covenant of Mayors. The majority of the people in this NEMSN group, Sustainability Network, all belong to that. We do not. Whether we belong or not, we were trying to meet some of the goals that they had established there for things that needed to be done, One is a sustainability action plan, a climate action plan. It's got multiple and numerous names, so whatever you feel like calling it. We've never done a formal vulnerability assessment. And there's other things attendant with that. So things that are going on around town, some of them are more organic, if you will. And I'll use that term because, for example, farm to table. The Board of Ed is out doing that for the schools. Other things like that are going on around town, and there's other actions being taken by folks around town. Not that the government should necessarily control those, but it would be nice to have sort of a clearinghouse that someone or some group in town knows all those things that are going on. So we could either provide support or assistance or whatever needs to be done, or help just setting it up to do those sorts of things.
I guess I see that the Board of Education as the Board of Education, and the town engineering departments as the engineering department. How is it that the Board of Education gets into looking at sustainability issues? It sounded like even hardware, separate from
The way that works, Frank, is we turn the buildings over to the Board of Education. They operate the buildings, maintain the buildings. There is language in the state statute that the town could provide in-kind maintenance of the buildings. The towns never chose to do that. The Board of Education, for example, can go out and get grants to fix their roofs, to do all those sorts of things. And they were actually leading the pack, if you will, in the conversion of lighting systems and that kind of stuff. So they were actually ahead of the town in several areas early on. So typically they have their own maintenance department, which is bigger. They have more square footage certainly than the town buildings. We're now reducing it to have fewer buildings. So at some point there was discussion as to whether those maintenance departments should be merged. That was out there, had been discussed, whether that's a viable option or not. But certainly the folks we don't have as many in the various trades that they do. So maybe they do it and we combine with them. But there's those sorts of opportunities out there. Just like we talk about combinations of other things around town. You know?
Real quick, you mentioned that the town of Groton was not part of Climate Mayors Organization. What was that?
No, it's called the Global Covenant of Mayors. And I can provide just some documentation on that. I could send it all to you. I've put together a folder of information. Zell said I should do that. So I put that in there. I put some other work that was done on reporting kind of things. I've got a whole, probably one of these lateral file cabinet drawers full of various studies that have been conducted over the last 10 years or so. So that's, I mean, kind of, we're trying to move ahead, but we have no actual plan or roadmap, if you will, on some of these things. So it's more of a catch can basis and what can be pushed at the time. Another thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about was.
Well, Rick, before you.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Before you go on, so do you have some views about what that strategic plan ought to look like? And
I in fact have probably 10 or 15 copies of various ones from across the nation on my shelf right here.
Great. That's great.
And you know, I looked at one from Sacramento. It was particularly intriguing and looked like something that would fit. They're a bigger city. I have smaller burgs, like some out in the Midwest. I think I have Austin, Texas. I have any number of them that could be made available to you folks if you would want to look through something like that to see what it should be. I think the way it could be done is if we hired, and we're probably going to have to hire a consultant to do that, but could the consultant work directly for the committee and you guys work with him to come up with how that thing is put together with assistance from the town staff? I mean, that may be a way to do it, but we'd have to get funding to do that. So I didn't get an opportunity to put it in the CIP this year, but maybe I can get something put in the CIP next year to ask for some funding to do that. And to my mind, it's something we've been lacking over the last 10, 12 years, because there's really been no policy, if you will. For example, the rec department called me and said, do we have a sustainability policy? Because they're trying to do some rec department certification. And the answer is no. You know, so what else can we say at this point?
What kind of a grant do you need for that?
I don't know if there's grants available. We haven't looked into that option yet.
But in terms of dollar amount, I'm talking.
I would guess it would be in the vicinity of 100K, plus or minus. You know,
Yep.
It's a lot of work. I mean, it's probably as much work as the plan of conservation and development by the time, because you want to look at all things. You want to look at transportation. You want to look at the buildings. You want to look at the community. You want to look at, you know, foodstuffs. You want to look at waste. You want to, I mean, you could put a list together of all the things that should be looked at to make the community sustainable.
So do you see in the sort of wake of COVID, where I suspect that there is going to be funding for different projects, and fortune favors the prepared.
Right.
Do you see that as an area of where there may be increased likelihood of gotten to, or less?
I don't know. I can't really speak to that. I get a thing on grants that comes through periodically. It's like every week, it seems like there's a list. There's never anything I've seen that we could take advantage of as the town. But
Yep.
That's why, as Ed will tell you, that's
Hey, Frank, I love
seize the moment.
Seize the moment.
Yep.
The economist.
What's
Yeah.
that, caveat emptor or something like that? Or
Yeah.
Well, that's let the buyer beware.
yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's,
Yeah, Rick, and is there, if you were to get such a grant, would you, do you have capacity to do some of the studies and the things that you're talking about emotionally?
well, I would have the capacity probably to help administer it. I got two
Yeah.
school projects, or three. One's almost nearing completion. The other two are starting construction. So I do have some windows in there that I can do some things like I'm doing with chasing around solar panels and that sort of thing. So yeah, there could be some, and if, you know, if the bulk of the stuff came from you folks, or the work or the questioning or this kind of stuff, you know, I could provide the town's part of it, and you may want to look at the community aspects of that. Because I know you were looking at a sustainability manager before, and I read the position description, and it's not what I would have looked for, frankly, but it's what you guys thought you wanted to look for. So because now there's a group of those folks out there that are trained in sustainability. The University of New Hampshire Institute for Sustainability, they had one of these graduate fellows that we're working with this summer, again, to kind of update our greenhouse gas and benchmarking. That is now, and she's got to be maybe 30 and graduated from the program several years ago, and she's the sustainability manager for the city of Providence. And a super gal. So these kids are really sharp when it comes to that stuff, and they have the energy and the desire to do that work. And what we need, you know, to my mind, what we need is somebody to manage a program, either to help put the strategy together, or if they have a strategy if we have a strategy, ultimately to execute the strategy. So that's just kind of a personal opinion on that, having seen the way other communities work. Some communities, their planner is their sustainability person, but again, it's a second job to them. I'm doing us. It's a second or third job for me. Other communities have maybe a part-time sustainability manager, if you will. Sometimes a couple of communities have the same. It works part-time at each of the communities. So there's any number of ways that could be put together, if you will.
And the fact that we are not part of that global covenant of mayors is because we have to pay something, or is that?
No, you don't have to pay anything, and you don't have to do everything it says. But I think when I forward you the document, and I'll forward it to you, Zell, and you can distribute it as you,
That'd be great, Rick.
yeah, as you see fit. But just read through that document, and it explains the whole thing to you. There is, you can sign up if you want to. You don't have to sign up. You could look at the concepts that they have to help develop a plan for the town, if you will. So, and it's not, and it doesn't cost you anything. It does have some goals that are typically put in there. I mean, so you can get as involved or as much or as little as you want, I think, basically. And I'd be happy if you have taken a look at it to discuss it with you.
Yeah, I have one other question.
Sure.
Do you have a sense for how much of the information that a sustainability plan would require in terms of inputs already exists in some documents or some work that's already been done, so that it would not be de novo work, brand new?
Well, they're gonna want to do the same kind of interview process. I mean, Zell will tell you that he had some community meetings, is that task force we had before that provided significant community input. You look at they would have to look at the various areas. There's some, for example, the traffic area. If we want to look at traffic, we don't have much information at all. So that would be almost starting from scratch to see how traffic, and whether it's through traffic or people coming from one town to another or whatever, would affect the greenhouse gas in Groton. So we have some of the areas we have virtually no information. Others we have far more. So it would be, and typically we'd send out with an RFQ first, asking for qualifications, and then an RFP for a proposal, and get that information back and what they thought. And those things usually have a visit or two associated with them, so they can gather information on what we are.
Yeah, Groton actually is a member of Sustainable Connecticut, which is an organization that has gathered municipalities together and does work on them with them to help develop sustainability plans. And I think importantly, which is sort of the cross section of our task force, we tend, and I think appropriately, to try to really quantify the risk of climate impacts and see what we can do to mitigate those. But obviously the other component of that is sort of in the process to make sure we're becoming more sustainable. And Sustainability Connecticut is really focused on that, from all sorts of things, from housing stock to, I mean, it's just a very, very broad panorama of things that they deal with. And we are a member of that, so we should make use of it.
Right, I understand that, Jesse, but again, you have to have somebody to do the work, right? We are members. They ask me for information to fill it in. It's, to what I've seen to date, based on the questions I received from the planning department, it's appears to be more of a score sheet as opposed to something like this. Now, the network was looking at hopefully providing someone that could help with this covenant of mayors kind of thing. I have to check with them to see if they still had a fellow that's going to do that could come talk to us or look at that. But and I don't mean to downplay the Sustainable Connecticut thing, but I haven't seen much out of it from that regard, and maybe we just haven't assigned the right manpower to it or what have you.
Right. I think the point I would just try to make with that, and it's the same thing that we talked about our last meeting on sort of other projects, but the community rating index, we are quote into that program.
Right.
Similarly, we're quote into Sustainability Connecticut. They're not Sustainable Connecticut. They're not going to do the work for us, but they are a roadmap. They're a roadmap of the things. So with the community rating system, here are the things.
that the town ought to do. It's not creating the wheel. And similarly with Sustainable Connecticut, can you sort of say or assess where your town stands on these
Right.
different things? And I think they're very useful from that perspective.
Right. And there was also a table that we did that I was hoping to have today that compared what we've done to other communities going through this. It's a similar thing. It's just a listing of the various components and where you stand with each of those components. So
Yeah, if you can find that, Rick, that'd be very valuable.
yeah, no, we'll get that.
Yeah.
I have one more question. I'm just intrigued by your perspective on the description of the job description of resilience and your different perspective on that. For about over a year, we've been meeting and collecting information.
Right.
And a lot of our focus has been on disaster preparedness.
Right, understand.
And I think that's appropriate, of course. But I want to get a sense from you, what is the proportional contribution of the resilience and sustainability part of the plan? Because I personally view that as mid and long-term investments. And as opposed to emergency preparedness, we've had practically every sector that come to talk to us, and they all seem to have a disaster preparedness plan of some sort.
Yep.
But I get the impression that you have a different perspective on resilience and sustainability as perhaps different from emergency preparedness.
Slightly. I mean, sustainability, they talk about the 3 Ps, right? People, property, people, planet, and profit, right? We don't make a profit because we're a town. So the only thing we do monetarily is we look at what Mary talked to you about, is what our grand list is, how we save money on utilities, how we do those other things. People, we have to look at how we look at the people, how they're treated. They're currently into a big process with equity. I mean, sustainability is one of the latest hot topics. We could have some of that. We haven't looked at those kind of things at all. And then the other part is the planet, the environment, which we're talking about sea level rise and all those kind of things. So, along with what I've said previously, there's also a program of sustainability where people can get certified as sustainability managers, if you will, at a couple levels. I talked to somebody about doing that before, and they said, well, how long have you been doing it? I said, well, you should just take the test. So I may do that because I may want to do something in my future life. But like I'm saying, there's folks out there that are certainly well qualified, and that's kind of my. We have the emergency preparedness. We had an emergency preparedness officer that looked at that and should be looking at those emergency things. But in fact, and I can't remember if it's Milford or even farther down the coast, they actually had their sustainability person sitting in the emergency operations center telling police, fire, what the best route was to get from one place to the other based on the conditions in the town at the time. And we haven't married those things together yet. So we may look at those as one and the same, but they could be viewed as 2 separate things, but they certainly have to be merged together. So one supports the other.
Yeah.
So Rick, a couple of
Zell, I'm sorry, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that I have to sign off because as I said at the outset, this is Elizabeth's birthday. Sorry, Rick, it's got nothing to do.
Well, by all means, Frank, you better go do that.
happy birthday in that case.
In that case.
Happy birthday, Elizabeth.
And
nice seeing you,
Rick, I really appreciate the time. Well done. Another well done presentation.
Yeah. So, anytime I'm willing. So I talk to you all. But
well, let me before we wind this up, because I sense a number of you have other commitments to do here. Rick, would you be available to come back and
Oh,
spend
yeah.
some time?
Yeah, I'd like to talk to some other things. Some of the things Jesse may be familiar with was like ESCOs, which are environmental energy plans
Service
where you
companies,
have a company come in and they evaluate their buildings, then they help finance it, and you end up with some savings
So-
over the period of years. So there's there's other things that potentially we could move forward with, or at least discuss to see if they're viable options for the town. So
Right.
yeah,
Did
I'd be
I-
happy to
did
come
I-
back.
Did I
Jesse?
hear you correctly, Rick? I'm sorry, I'm a little
ESCOs
distracted,
or
but anyway,
ESPs.
that you are already working with CSW on potential opportunities with the landfill and net metering and stuff?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
They sent me an application, which
Okay.
they said it was already
Yep.
full,
Okay.
but I just haven't had a chance to get back with them. But
No,
I've
I
been
think that group
I've been
is-
working with them on the other.
Yeah, I think that group
Projects
is
too.
lobbying very hard on the legislative front to expand net metering. So,
Yeah. They seem to be a pretty sharp group. The couple of folks I talked to.
yeah, I think they are. So,
Rick, if we get back together,
Yep.
a couple things I'd be interested in is, one is sort of what your view is about the building, the school Board of Education, because at one point, I think Wes Greenleaf, who is the
Yep.
key person there, had really sort of taken it upon himself to make those schools much more energy efficient.
Right.
And had done a lot of work. And I guess I'd sort of, we don't have to talk about it tonight, but if we get back together, would you talk a little bit about what's happened since Wes is gone, and
Yeah.
are there
Yeah.
opportunities there that we need to look at?
Right.
And then the other thing is that, again, not tonight, but I'd be interested in knowing what sort of interactions you've had or continue to have with the Circa group over in at Avery Point, because they seem to have been moving forward on a whole series of fronts that are of interest to us.
Yeah, I know Bruce over there, but I haven't had much opportunity to speak with him recently. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. My question is to the group. You continue with this for a few minutes, or should we? We've got a couple other things I want to talk about beyond about procedural stuff for our next upcoming meetings and so forth.
So I can leave you now, and I'd be happy to come back whenever you would like to hear from me.
Okay.
And
does anybody else have any questions for Rick at this point?
Before I.
Well, I had just one question that Rick, you had been
Sure.
talking quite positively about the New England Municipal Sustainable Network. Is that a group that meets regularly? And
we meet twice a year, typically. You know, we've gone to the waste energy plants. We've talked about foods. We usually have one topic for each session. This time we're having a virtual session. The topic is not very clear at this point, but the benefit we have is we've been able to work with the University of New Hampshire and get a fellow. So we're getting a fellow again this year for y'all's knowledge to update our greenhouse gas and building benchmarking stuff, so we can figure out where we've gone since we looked at it some time ago, Zell. So we'll see how that works. And I do have reports from the last one that I can forward on to you. There's 3 of them. One of them talks about how we did with our energy action plan before and what was done. And I should look at updating that matrix before I send it off to you.
So is the group primarily people like you, or is there also civilians like?
No, it's typically folks like me. It's usually the governmental folks that are from the various communities, and they bring that perspective. Like I said, there's usually planners, public works guys, occasionally, not generally public works, but it's usually either a planner or sustainability director or manager or what have you from the various towns or whatever.
Well, listen, Rick, thank you so much for your time. One last round. Any other questions you want to ask Rick that comes to your mind right now?
No, and I certainly thank you for having me. I'd be happy to come back and speak with you anytime.
Okay. Well, we'll because of your long experience here and some of the stuff you have, I think it would be really useful if we could do that soon.
Well, I'm kind of like you, Zell. I got a passion here too, you know. So.
Yeah, I know. Okay, well, thanks, Rick.
Yep, you're welcome.
I'm going to sign off also. Thank you
Okay.
all very much for your
Okay.
Well, thank
time.
you, Mary. I appreciate your help.
Okay.
For the rest of the task force, I had on the agenda a brief discussion that I asked Victor to possibly talk a little bit about is how we take advantage of the experience we've seen with the COVID-19 issue and how that might relate to resiliency and sustainability in our group. And so, because I think there's going to be some lessons learned here that are really crucial going forward. And then sort of, I'm going to jump this together. I think we probably ought to look at fairly soon both the Anchorage report and the Fairfield report. I've asked Sarah if she would at some point give a presentation or a summary of what the Anchorage report looked like, and then Jesse talk about the Fairfield. Now, they aren't exactly on point, but they at least give some ideas of what a model might look like. And then, so Victor, do you want to just spend a couple of minutes on this, and then I want to try to find out how you all feel about meetings coming up this summer.
Okay, well, I think most of you have intuitive ideas about how the COVID-19 pandemic is a dress rehearsal for climate change events. And so I don't want to get into the weeds of my own thinking, because I think I've informally talked to some of you, and you all have very logical and great ideas. But I think the most important headline and bumper sticker for me is that resilience and sustainability cannot be improvised. And it really requires a lot of what Rick was talking about, a strategic perspective on that involves risk assessment and priority setting and so forth. I'm finding some sources that have nothing to do with climate change that have taken the topic of sustainability, resilience and sustainability as a result of COVID-19. One of the most interesting has been by the Marsh insurance company that, as you remember, was one of the main occupants of the World Trade Center that was hit by the airplane. And they really they insure huge sectors of the global economy, not only here in the United States, but internationally. And they've taken the COVID-19 like a slap in the face and said, in every aspect of our lives and of society, the port of entry happened to have been a health issue. But it had many characteristics similar to how we think about climate change. It was inevitable, although not technically as predictable as some of the things that we know from the science of climate change. This appeared, but a lot of people knew that it may have been inevitable. We just didn't know when, and we couldn't call it. But from my readings, I'm putting together some of the parallels and some of the differences. And I think over the next few weeks and months, we're going to come up with some concrete lessons learned, and we can insert them into our planning process, and then think, are we covering these gaps and things that we were blinded by this coronavirus. So that's all I'm going to say as a way more of an introduction of a theme.
Victor?
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if it'd be worthwhile, and maybe bother them at this point, but, you know, we had the woman who heads up the Ledgely Health District in, and you and I had met with her ahead of time, and then she met with the whole group. I would think that listening to her again at some point about what some of the health districts reflections are on the COVID experience, what went well, what they now recognize they need to do or enhance, and how that might impact their challenges with respect to this. Maybe you're pursuing that as part of this, but I would think that would be an important conversation to just reboot.
For sure. I'm working closely with them, so I have that benefit of getting sort of direct from the ground kind of thing impressions. And so you're absolutely right. The maybe when we have the time and we can devote time to dissecting some of the lessons learned, it would be, I think your idea is right on. And right now they're very much in the weeds.
Yeah, sure.
Emergency response and the resilience and sustainability part, as I said, we're improvising as a country as best we can how to deal with this totally catastrophic thing. But there are other countries, and in fact, I'm writing a paper about this, that where they have been developing resilience and sustainability since the 1940s. And I was reviewing the statistics on COVID, every aspect of it, from testing to number of cases to economic impact to deaths, the whole thing. And believe me, we could have done a better job, but not by doing something last year or in the last 6 months or during the, but
years ago.
15, 20 years ago. Exactly right.
Yeah, it would have had been a sustained effort.
This resilience and sustainability is not an improvisation game.
Yep.
That's a great quote, actually. Resilience cannot be improvised.
I think that's yeah.
That's great.
Let's write that
The thing
down.
that
I'll get T-shirts with that on.
That's good.
It's great.
Okay.
One of the things I think we have struggled with all along is what is the context or sort of jacket cover that we put our report in. And one of the challenges, and it's the book that you gave us all for Christmas, Sal, you know, nobody wants to talk about it. But I think, as Victor sort of said in his article in the Connecticut Mirror and other things, this is our entree, I think. And exactly what you were just sort of saying, we can't, you know, okay, 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050. We can't wait till 2040 to deal with that, you know, kind of thing. And I think that one of the challenges in all of the big issues we want to get people involved in is relevance to them. You know, they're worried about putting, particularly within the disadvantaged community, worried about putting food on the table tomorrow, you know, all of those kinds of things. And one of the challenges of back when I worked in the peace movement a lot and also in the environmental movement is how do you bring these issues to become relevant and in the forefront and have attention when all of those other things are the day-to-day concerns. I don't know what I'm feeding my children tonight. And so I think this, this experience within our country across all sorts of echelons, but obviously more than others, is a really good way to try to see, can we come up with appropriate analogies and say, okay, this is, you know, what we might want to do. I haven't thought those through at all, but I think as we struggle for what is the handle that we get people's attention on, this probably is a large part of it.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say at this point, except I mean, part of me wants to hurry up and get things going. Part of me says, be more deliberative and take the time to do this in a very thoughtful way. And the more I look at the whole picture, it's just going to, how we frame this in positive terms, not negative terms, how we frame this in terms of opportunities as opposed to regulation. I mean, it's going to be really important.
Well, I think the nomenclature they use is shocks, shocks to the economy, shocks to our way of life that happened. September 11th was one example. The 2008 and Great Depression was another. This undoubtedly will be one of the greatest. I think they are, as Jesse was noting, points of entry. And it takes a lot of discipline, and sometimes the politics doesn't allow a measured response. I think we can overshoot on some things because we are traumatized by the experience. But I think we're doing our homework in terms of assessing all the moving parts to this. And
I do too, but I think periodically this group needs to kind of step back, because I think we're all smart people. We're all into the topic, and it can become like this just infinite scholarship thing, and you have to take a time out and just say, all right, what are we trying to achieve, and what does the end product look like? And let's make sure we're lined up on when and how we're delivering that end product, because we should have an end.
Well, as someone who's maybe a little bit of a Johnny-come-lately with the group, and one of the things that struck me, and I was going to bring up tonight, is that I'm finding a hard time to latch on to any one thing, because we are kind of using the Trump diversion. Everything's interesting, so you start to jump from one thing to another. So for example, we often they say that the military is often preparing itself to fight the last war. We really don't know what the next crisis is going to be, and who would have ever thought? Well, some people have, obviously, but that we'd be into a pandemic right now. And so certainly on our list of topics that resiliency and sustainability needs to be covering is public health. But Zell's interested in transportation. I think there's been a lot of talk about energy and renewable, carbon reduction, sea level, climate change, cluster, recycling, and waste disposal. And one of the thoughts I had was that maybe we should each take one of those topics and flesh it out a bit, because I think that we're constantly scattering. Each of these meetings that we've had so far with our guests have been fascinating. I really enjoyed them, learned a lot, and I think I'm quite impressed with our town, the quality of our town employees who are thinking about this stuff and are doing good stuff in response to it. So far, I don't feel like we're pissing in the wind. I think that in terms of the town goes, there's people on board with us here. But in any case, to try to get a little more specificity, or at least for me to feel like I'm getting my teeth into something here, and as opposed to being just listening to interesting talks every month, I feel like I'd like to take on one of these topics and really, dig into it. And so maybe I'm the expressions tonight seems to be getting into the weeds. I'm not sure that's a positive, but maybe it is. I like the weeds myself.
Yeah.
I think we'll be happy to give you some to cultivate.
I think it would be good to, like, every 6 months, just have a meeting where we don't invite anybody in. We just sort of take an assessment of where we are, you know, where we're headed, and then kind of reboot the thing or
Yeah.
reorient it around what we're trying to accomplish.
Well,
I feel a real need for that, Sarah. We have Victor's wonderful outline when we started, and we assigned, as Mickey is suggesting, areas to each of us. I think each of us has done a lot of thinking in those areas. Why don't we just come together and share where that thinking has gone, and where do we need to go from here with it?
Yeah,
Um,
I would agree with that.
I want to show with Mick, I want to, let me see if,
We've basically done what you've said, Mickey.
But we need to give him one. We need more input.
Obviously. So,
Mickey, you can, I don't know if you can see my screen.
yes,
Yeah.
you're sharing it.
I'll send you this, and we need to update it, but we divvied up all of our conversations into an infrastructure and a responsible stakeholder, which you will be a wonderful addition to. Natural environment, roads, bridges, storms, sewage, power. Jesse Denzel are in charge of that. Water supply, transportation, communication, healthcare, and the built environment, public buildings, and so forth. And so you can peruse the document just as a guide to precisely what you're asking, which I feel equally anxious about. I want to start putting meat on the bones of something like this.
I mean, in this, I mean, I have sort of taken on the transportation one of those things right now. And at the last meeting, I told you about, I think I sent you a copy of what I was doing. And interestingly enough, I've now got the 4 towns all signed on: Stonington, City
Great.
of Groton, Town of Groton, and New London. Although I haven't seen their letter yet. And then I got the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council signed on. I haven't seen their letter yet. But then out of the blue, literally out of the blue, I got a copy of a letter from Pfizer saying, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And so I immediately called Sarah and said, did you have a hand in this? And she said, no.
I should have. It was a bad day.
You're taking credit for that, Sarah.
Anyhow,
Yeah, you're right.
so
I made them do it.
what's interesting about this is that this has been very time consuming. And it's been a lot of slugging. And so as long as you're willing to take these things on with those understandings, that would be great. I would like to sort of understand what it is you all agree to take on so I can coordinate it.
Well, what we're suggesting is that we have a session devoted to
part of
us. Now, I know that we can't do an us session without inviting the public, and that's fine. They can watch us be us. But just a sort of regroup session, if you will.
we can do that. We have to do it.
That's what I'd propose.
We have to do that in a public way. That's all.
No, I agree.
Yeah, and Zell,
anyway.
And I think there's a difference between putting some, as I say, meat on the bones of those sectors and shepherding a particular project, which is what you're doing, all of our benefit, and I think it's phenomenal that you're doing that. But I don't think, for example, I thought that I was signing up to shepherding or with Sarah, our sector in healthcare, to shepherding a resilience and sustainability project. We're going to.
No,
it's a different thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And part of what I'm doing is because I was personally interested in it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I didn't bring it to the task force
Fabulous.
for a long time because I felt it was something that I thought was a long shot. And what I've learned is that by treating this as an opportunity for the community, as opposed to this is so good for the environment and reducing greenhouse gases and all those other things, I just simply, say, hey, getting people to work on time, reducing congestion, providing people an alternative to the automobile. And so it was sort of a not particularly sexy, just a lot of work. But I think that can be done. And what this is going to clearly, in the transportation area, it's going to lead to a lot of other things like electric vehicles. How do we do it in this community? How do you support it? That goes back to, the energy issue and so forth, and ultimately back to greenhouse gas reduction.
Right. Okay.
Can we,
Okay, so
can I do a motion that we end?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now wait, before you do that,
I just want to.
It's
You're gonna
that's not
send
the
us,
official name for it, I know, but.
are you all available to meet in June?
Yes.
Right now we're first. I am. I'm not going anywhere.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Hey, Victor, are you going to send out that matrix, did you say, or send me a copy?
I'll send you a copy, and I'll send it to everybody because I may have added a couple of bits to it.
Okay, so do you want to meet in June or not?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not going anywhere.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think I can have June work.
Victor?
I'm taking my computer on my boat, so I'm going somewhere.
I'll be on the boat too, but I think.
That's all right. I don't
I
care.
was gonna say, tell me where you're going. We'll follow each other.
Yeah, we'll butts around somewhere.
Okay, so unless I hear otherwise, and I will also talk with Maggie and Frank, we'll try to have a meeting and like to continue this conversation. I think we'll do it maybe taking Sarah's suggestion that we
Yeah, I think that.
step back and go back and look at Victor, your matrix and see how
I
that.
think that's great.
It'd also be good to just look at all these interviews. I mean, Jesse did a nice job of summarizing a couple of big aha moments of the last two meetings. I mean, what are the big takeaways, that we think in our hearing, in our scholarship, we picked up,
Okay.
So it would be June 24th, the last Wednesday in the month, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Motion.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second? So moved.
Quadrupled.
Okay. Anybody got any last comments? Yes, have a
Safe travels.
safe home.
You too. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Safe travels, Zell.